for Mexico, we have seen hands-on the effects of climate change, and the media coverage is increasing. A few years back, environmental situations were not as covered as today, but now, since we're seeing how the economical issues are affecting our way of life, every time we are more concerned about climate change.
India has now started learning about climate change and writing about it after a lot of sensitization and training workshops by different international and local organizations. Having realized that the world is changing, the international organization and local organization took upon themselves to start educating the media, who are slowly adapting and are taking the information out there.
The scenario in Pakistan regarding climate change, especially reporting on climate change, has changed quite a bit in recent years. And I think I attribute this newfound, I would say, awareness of climate change. There's a linkage with the floods. Especially it started with the 2010 floods.
Well, I think environmental reporting in Sri Lanka has increased in not only in content, in terms of quality as well. But if you're talking about climate change, I think it's a different scenario. There is a little bit of confusion sometimes you see in reportage. How you make the linkages and how to find the issues, how to differentiate, how to look for that data, and that whole scientific gap is not always understood. And so there is a bit of a dilemma.
You see, in the Philippines, climate change is a new topic for us journalists. And mostly, some of the journalists are, well, not reporting on climate change issues because of the science behind it. So I think the level of awareness for journalists in the Philippines is not that high, unlike the developing country journalists.
The way the media looks at climate change and environment, I'll speak on behalf of my media house, which is the New Vision, the Vision Group, which is the lead media house. We have got a desk for environment, and onto it we attach senior people who make sure that they follow up all the issues that are related with the environment and climate change. And we make sure that the stories that, as most of them are investigative, because in my country we have a problem of, much as we want to develop into an industrial country, we have a problem whereby all the investors who come to the country who cannot get land elsewhere, again, some people encroach or are allocated land in wetlands.
And now the concept is very well managed in Mexico. Everybody knows what you're talking about when you mention climate change. And it's a much more progressive situation within the media. Now, especially television, when you see the images of people drowning, of people losing their crops, of people losing their homes because of drought or because of floods, climate change has become a big issue.
They are slowly getting to understand it, because most of the international NGOs and local NGOs have really gone down to the people, talking to them and translating some of the material into our local language. Though they are not really accepting, but at least the message is being gotten out there.
Again, I also think there's more reportage on climate change taking place in the English media, whereas the debate should really take place in Sinhala and Tamil, where more people will have access and will consume local language media better.
They were called the super floods, and there was also coverage linking it to climate change, with a lot of experts coming forward and saying that climate change is probably responsible for this particular massive flood.
2 years ago, we faced a drought in the western and part of southern province, where government had to come in to start giving out relief food. Maize is our staple food. And because of no rains, we experienced a lot of food shortages, especially maize. The media reported, it was almost like an everyday thing. In some areas, it could even hit headlines, which was rare, because mostly it's the politicians that take the bigger space of the newspaper.
We connect disasters on climate change issues like sea level rise, storm surge, drought, flooding. Most of the journalists in the Philippines are covering general issues. So sometimes they report environment or climate change issues in a political angle, sports angle, business or even entertainment angle.
We have environmental news every day in print and in the electronic media. We have lots of new blogs coming out as well. But monsoons and rainfalls are a very big issue in my country, hurricanes as well. Every year we have hurricanes, so that gets a lot of coverage because we have a lot of loss of life and loss of infrastructure because of that.
There is a sizable amount of space given and there is increased interest, but most of the time it seems to be event-based. When something happens, then there's this increased awareness and increased interest in reporting on those issues. So that happens.
It's not front page news, but it'll be on the second page or it'll be on the back page. So, I mean, it only becomes breaking news when it's like a flood, and then later on in the, you learn that, okay, climate change is triggering more of these floods. So you'll have an expert quoting, a quote by an expert, but not front page news. And in fact, German Watch, I think, has been ranking it in the top 3 countries most affected by climate disasters. That I think it's not long before it actually becomes headline news.
We've been talking about deforestation, the cutting of trees, and it has prompted our first Republican president, Dr. Kenneth Kaunda, to start the campaign on tree planting. So they started the tree planting in March. They started with Lusaka, which is the capital city, and now they are going into the rural areas to replant trees. It's being championed by our first Republican president, which shows that their government has heard and have read and that they are responding.
Mexico is one of the most affected countries on climate change and is the first country in Latin America to pass laws in order to promote fight against climate change. For example, one of the main reasons is that a couple of years ago we had the worst drought in our country in over 70 years in the northern part of the country, and last year in the southern part we had the worst rainfall. So many people are losing their homes, are dying, we're losing our crops, and economically we've been very affected. So that has increased the debate in politics in my country to improve our way of life and to reduce our CO2 emissions so that climate change is not a big issue.
There have been some policy changes, and there have been a climate communication strategy introduced by experts on communications and climate science in Sri Lanka. So we are looking at a 10-year phase of looking at how to communicate science and in terms of influencing policy. I think there is a certain dialogue, but it's not good enough, and I'm not too sure whether we are making a huge impact on in driving those policy changes and program changes.
With reporting on climate change issues, policymakers are now acting on environment or climate change issues, and actually our reports push the policymakers to act more on disasters and climate change and put sustainability issues or review their building codes or plans.
News we write gives knowledge to the civil society and other concerned leaders plus the citizen to make sure that the environment is protected. Climate change is here with us and is something that needs to be